What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, per usual, bringing you another edition of the Thomas Take Sunday night's show. I wanted to have Brad Wingfield on to discuss the state of the AFC East. Unfortunately, we had some scheduling conflicts. Life is life, as I always say, and could not get Brad on this weekend. Pushing for next weekend to discuss the state of the AFC East. We are fast approaching football season. There is no doubt about that, and I'm really amped up, primed and ready for football season, especially fantasy football, which I'm definitely going to keep you guys posted on all things fantasy football. And obviously, August 26th is a big day for the show. It's a month away, practically, almost, but August 26th is a huge day for the show because I will be going live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel, and I'll be going live during the first Thomas Take Sports Podcast Fantasy Football League Draft, and I've brought in the 9 most avid listeners of the podcast, the 9 people that have tuned into the show more than anybody on the podcast. 9 people that I communicate with the most in terms of the show, and I can't wait to compete against them for the grand prize to be determined, to be announced, I should say, at a later date. So, very, very excited to communicate with those guys live on the show during the draft. I'll just basically be running through the draft as if it's a draft show. You know, each pick, I'll recap it, put together, team comparisons and stuff like that. Talk about each team's picks and what I think for their fantasy hopes for that particular player. Really excited. I think this is going to be a new, innovative way to really allow myself to communicate with the viewers and listeners and the fans of the show. So, so I just wanted to really start the show off with that. The headline for this particular 15-minute edition of the Thomas Take, part 1 of tonight's show, is Anthony Smith knocking out Mauricio Shogun Hua today in Hamburg, Germany, in the first round. His second consecutive knockout victory at 205 pounds. We have to remember that Anthony Smith was once a middleweight, moving up from middleweight to 205. Knocks out Rashad Evans, retires Rashad Evans essentially. I hate to say that, but that's what then followed afterwards. And now he knocks out Shogun Hua, combined in these 2 fights with Rashad Evans and Mauricio Shogun Hua, 2 former UFC light heavyweight champions, by the way. Smith spent 2 minutes and 22 seconds inside the cage with both of them. So this is really astonishing. And people can say whatever the hell they want about Rashad being past his prime, about Shogun being past his prime. When you, quote-unquote, dust off or finish 2 former champions in the first round, no less, there's reason for me to believe that we should definitely have some interest in seeing this guy fight again. We should definitely want to see this guy fight again. We should definitely want to see him. Fight in one of the top fights, whether that's against Alexander Gustafsson, whether that's against Jimmy Manawa. And some recent news has just come out about Alexander Gustafsson that he does have an injury, an undisclosed minor injury, which I'm not saying Gustafsson is ducking Anthony Smith, but the timing of this announcement is a little odd, being that Gustafsson was left opponentless. He was slated to fight Volkan Ozdemir, did not fight Ozdemir due to the fact that Ozdemir pulled out. It was Alexander Gustafsson versus to be determined, and here we have Anthony Smith versus Shogun Hua, basically on a silver platter. Whoever wins this fight, if it's Anthony Smith especially, he would fight Gustafsson maybe. He does his work. He does his job. He dusts off Shogun in the first round. No disrespect to Shogun, but it was one of the most vicious knockouts that I've seen in recent memory. So Smith does his work, and you'd assume that Gustafsson would have a valuable, or a viable, I should say, opponent for UFC 227. And now that is not the case because Gustafsson is pulling out of UFC 227. And you guys know, the guys and girls that listen to this show, you guys know that I'm a huge Instagram user. You can follow me on Instagram at ThomasTakeSP. And one of the first posts that I stumbled upon on Instagram, I'm going to pull that up for the viewers and for the listeners of the show tonight. More so the listeners due to the fact this is an audio version of the podcast today. One of the first posts that popped up on my news feed was that of the current UFC light heavyweight champion as well as the current UFC heavyweight champion. In the picture he posted was from their original fight, Daniel Cormier versus Alexander Gustafsson, both men raising their arms up in victory at the end of the bell, the final bell. DC had a lot to say in regards to this situation. It says, "Dear Alex, I don't know what happened to you going back to the Rockhold situation. You have always been a stand-up guy, but your behavior changed. From calling a guy out the day after he got knocked out, to now offering to fight me knowing I have a broken hand after Volkan couldn't go. Now you've turned down Jan Blachowicz, probably botched that, but turned down Khalil, all while calling for a heavyweight title fight. Now moments after Anthony Smith does his work like an animal, you decide you're hurt. Man, I respect you as a fighter, but I will always be grateful for October 2015. But you and I won't share that octagon again. I am disappointed in who you've become. You're so entitled, man. I can't deal with delusional people. Good luck recovering. Our time has passed. See you from the commentary table, DC." And the post currently has 29,012 likes. And I had to respond to it. Whether Daniel Cormier sees my response to it or not, I really don't give a damn. But here was my response to Daniel Cormier. "You were never going to fight him anyway," referring to Gustafsson, "and you could have just left it alone. But you had to make an extra long, unwarranted, unneeded, unnecessary post on Instagram. Tell the people whether you are truly fighting at 205 again or not, that way we know. If you want to be fluffy and fight Brock and get paid, I get it, but follow the GSP lead, vacate it soon." And what I'm referring to there is that when George St. Pierre won the UFC middleweight title, he soon thereafter, 31 days later, vacated that title. Had no reason to continue competing in that weight class because there was no incentive for him to do that. As far as his physically, he just could not fight at that weight, only in particular matchups where he felt like he had an advantage. And that is a part of it. That is a part of the business. And Daniel Cormier is conducting that type of business right now. When you become a big enough draw, you can somewhat pick your own fights. And that's what Daniel Cormier is doing. Long during his light heavyweight career, which I believe is over, and I've talked about that in previous episodes of the podcast. I do believe that Daniel Cormier's light heavyweight career is over. He was never going to fight Alexander Gustafsson. He found a way to fight Rumble twice before he fought Gustafsson again. So I thought the post was really unnecessary. I'd like to see DC vacate the belt. That way fighters at light heavyweight, like Anthony Smith, like Alexander Gustafsson, maybe, like Yoel Romero, can move up in weight, fight at that weight, and compete for a championship. DC will probably never weigh 205 pounds again at any moment in his life, being that right now he weighs in excess of over 250. Almost weighed 250 fighting Stipe. I highly doubt he's lost weight since the Stipe fight, since he captured the heavyweight title. especially knowing that he's about to fight a 265-pound behemoth, especially knowing that he fights better or just as good, if not better, at heavyweight than he did at light heavyweight. So I don't see Daniel Cormier back in the UFC light heavyweight division ever. And I see Anthony Smith as a fresh, young name that the UFC really needs right now in the UFC light heavyweight division. There's some talent there for sure. Corey Anderson had a win. Another guy that many people forget about is Ovin St. Preux, who had a durable performance versus John Jones a couple years back, who has finished a lot of foes in his day in the UFC. They say that the UFC light heavyweight division is weak. I don't think it's necessarily weak. I do think that the division has kind of gone stale because we've had the same names for the last 5 years competing in this division. John Jones, Daniel Cormier, Alexander Gustafsson, Anthony Johnson mixed in there. Those names are virtually all gone with the exception of Gus, and Jones will fight again at some point. We just don't know when. But Anthony Smith adds a new layer of excitement to that division, and I hope for his sake that he does get a fight at least versus someone in the top 3, at least versus someone like Jimmy Manuwa or Alir Latifi. One of those two should be the next fight if it's not Alexander Gustafsson. As of right now, it will not be Alexander Gustafsson. It will be one of those other guys. Maybe we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel with Gustafsson taking on Smith. But as of now, I don't see it. I don't see it at all. And I see Smith maybe fighting sometime in November. Whether that's against Gustafsson or not is another story. But nonetheless, 2 straight victories at 205 pounds versus 2 former 205-pound champions. I do not give a rat's ass whether people say Shogun is over the hill, Rashad was over the hill. No, those are 2 of the best UFC light heavyweights ever. They rank among the all-time greats. Those are legends in this sport. And oftentimes we throw the word legend around when the person is either old or getting old. And that's true, but knocked him out in the first round. Those guys don't get knocked out in the first round often. So congrats to Anthony Smith on a huge win. I'm a fan. I got to say, I'm hopping on the train. I enjoy it. It's something new. It's something fresh in this UFC light heavyweight division, as well as something that the UFC can kind of put their legs behind and give them a proper promotional push. Put him on the Madison Square Garden card. Put him on a card with when Conor comes back. Put him on that card. This guy deserves exposure. He's earned it, and I think that a title fight is in the near future for this man. Lionheart. Anthony Lionheart Smith. He's even got a pretty awesome nickname. Great win for him tonight. Corey Anderson had a great win. There was quite a few decent fights. Tybura versus Stefan Struve. Tybura had a great win. Very interesting stuff in the UFC Fight Night today. And next week there's another one, a big one in Calgary. And the week after that, August 4th, TJ Dillashaw versus Cody Garbrandt. I'm going to break down that fight. Actually, I already did, I meant to say. I already did break down that fight on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast YouTube channel. If you guys have not checked that out, check it out. Take care, everybody.